Hello, I'm Jennie Rayment and today I'm going to show you how to make these fabric boxes. You can make them any size you like. There is a fairly large one. If I lift the lid we have a slightly smaller one inside and indeed a smaller one inside that. They're very simple to make. You just need some S133, pair of scissors, you need some thread and probably some Bondaweb. I'll go through those in just a moment, but just to show you a couple more boxes, there is another little one there, and you can play with the feature on the side here as to whether you flatten it or whether you roll it back on itself. And there is another one. They can be any size you like. So as I said, you'll need some S133, which is the very stiff, heavyweight pelmet interfacing. Now you could also use the Decaville if you chose. It would be slightly lighter and you get a slightly spongier box. I suggest you want some Bondaweb because the S133 is only fusible on one side and fusing it on both sides is probably more useful. You'll obviously want thread to match your fabric, and read the fabrics, don't choose a directional design because the way the fabric gets laid down, if you've got a directional design, one side of the box it'll be upside down and you don't want that. In addition, you'll probably need a rotary cutter and a ruler. Once you've got those things gathered together, I'll explain exactly how you're going to make your box. So I've cut up my 133. I've got 5 4-inch squares. That represents the sides and the base of the box, and the lid. The lid has to be a 1/4 inch bigger than the sides and the base of the box. In addition to that, I've got 4 strips to make the sides of the lid. So my lid is 4 1/4 inches, and the strips are also 4 1/4 inches by 3/4 of an inch wide. Because the 133 is only fusible on one side, I've actually put Bondaweb on the other side. Now, just to make certain you fuse the Bondaweb to the correct side, because it's quite difficult to see, I have marked the unfused side of the 133 with a very light pencil mark. You can tell which is the fused side because it slightly sparkles. So here are my 5 squares, and I'm going to deal with the base of the box first. These are going to be put down with the side that I put the Bondaweb on facing upwards. And you want to lay your squares out with a little tiny weeny gap in between. And the reason for the gap is so that the sides of the box can fold up. Now, although you'll get all the instructions on the video, should you want to have more about it, it actually appears in this particular book, Sew Pieces. Let's just pop that to one side. So I've laid out my 5 squares. I'm going to now stick them together with a little bit of masking tape, just keeping that small gap in between the 5 squares. This masking tape will get removed, so don't worry about it. So a little tiny weeny gap all the way around. If you haven't got masking tape, any sort of sticky tape that's easy to remove could be used as a substitute. Once you've stuck the 5 squares together, take the fabric. Fat quarter is absolutely fine for this, or you could use any other piece of fabric. You just need a piece of fabric big enough to cover the sides and the base of the box. I'm now going to flip my masking tape sheet over, so the masking tape is on the bottom. Remember to do this. Taking the fabric, and it matters not which fabric you use, I'm going to lay the fabric on the top, making sure the fabric just covers the box underneath. With the iron, press it firmly in place. And you're going to press all the way around until you have fused the fabric to the fusible side of the S133. Right, once you've made sure you've fused it properly, you need to pass the iron over it for about 15 seconds to make certain it's all nicely stuck, and you can see it's beginning to stick really well. At that point then, you can put the iron to one side, remove the ironing board, flip the piece of work over, and I'm going to trim off the fabric, trimming it back exactly on the edges of the 133, but leaving a small bit on the corners. So with the rotary ruler, placing it so there's 1/2 inch or so on the corners. This is because we have to tuck in a little bit of material and cut. Cut exactly across the top of the Decaville. Try not to cut through it. 1/2 inch away here, there, and again exactly along the top of that. Flip it round, And you keep on cutting until you've gone round the entire thing, remembering to leave ½ an inch on the corners. And just in case you're a little bit puzzled, we did have a slight camera glitch there. So I've trimmed back right to the very edge of the interfacing. I've left ½ an inch there. What I'm going to do now is gaily rip off all the Bondaweb paper and the masking tape. Great feeling of satisfaction, pull it all off. Take the other piece of fabric, that's it, rip it off in one. Another little bit there, pull it off, great, fantastic. And the Bondaweb, marvellous. And now I'm going to take my second piece of fabric, lay it on the very top there, and press this on. When you've ironed it on, you will trim everything back to match the original fabric. So I've trimmed the fabric so they're all equal. And on the corners here, where I added that extra ½ an inch, I'm just going to turn the raw edges in, because that will give you the nice neat corner. Because how the box is going to work, it'll fold up like that, and this little bit will be the little pocket that sticks out. Or of course you can have it sticking in, the choice will be yours. So fold the edge under like that, and perhaps pin it in place and give it a press. So all 4 sections you're going to fold it under and just tuck it in. And when you've done that, we're going to go to the sewing machine. So tuck the corners in, put a pin in it, I give it a little press, and then you'll be ready to sew. I've popped the box underneath the sewing machine's foot, and I'm going to sew very close to the edge all the way around using a small stitch length. So starting on the edge here, now you will use thread that matches the fabric. I'm using thread so that you can see where I'm stitching. Good. Small stitch, really close to the edge, all the way around the entire piece. So just keep going all the way around with a small stitch. This is to basically bond the fabrics together, and you can hear it going through the S133 absolutely fine. There we are, and then along round here, remove the pins as you go. We don't sew with the pins, do we? No miss. Concerned about the noise, don't panic. It's absolutely fine. It's just cracking the fibres. That's it, nearly there now. And as you can see, I've gone really close to the edge all the way around. And please use matching thread. Right. Once you've gone right the way around the entire box, remove it from underneath the presser foot, because you're going to need to change the foot itself. I've got the regular foot on at the moment, the normal foot, and I'm now going to change it to the satin stitch or applique foot. This will be the foot that probably has a cutaway bit at the back. Now you might be lucky and have one that's an open toe, so there's no little bar at the front, or you might have one that has a closed foot. There's a little bar going across there. So there is your applique foot, and you can tell it's the applique foot because it will have a cutaway section at the back. We're going to do satin stitch, and if you were to do satin stitch with your normal foot, very frequently called the regular foot, that one has a flat bottom, and it tends to jam when you do the raised stitching that satin stitch is. If you've got something like a Bernina, one of the old ones, you might have a foot like this, but it will have a cutaway section at the back. So put on your applique foot goes on, and you're going to set your machine to do applique, satin stitch, which will be your zigzag. And we want to have your zigzag set at, to begin with, reasonably narrow in its width. So I'm going to have it set about 3, and the stitch length round about 1.2. Just let me cut the threads on there. And the only bit I'm going to satin stitch along are the firm sections where the 133 is, these sections. So underneath the presser foot, and the idea is you're going to go into the edge of the 133 in the fabric and over. You're going to wrap the edge with thread. So it's going to go in and off, and in and off. Go into the work and off, in and off, in and over, in and off. And you're only going to be stitching the firm sections. I'm not going to go all the way around, I'll just do one of them. And then I'm going to jump to the next one. So raise your presser foot, move the foot out of the way, and just carry the threads with you and jump to the next little bit. And again, you're wrapping the edge. If you were to do satin stitch immediately, on doing this, it will jam up. You've got to sort of build it up. So we've got it not too wide, round about 3.5, that sort of thing, and not too short a stitch length. When you've done the 4 sections, I'm going to take the needle out here and just jump back again. What's going to happen now is you're going to take the stitch width up a little bit, so perhaps go to 4 or 4.5, and take the stitch length down a little bit, maybe to say 0.8. And the idea is you go on top of and in between the previous stitching. You're still wrapping the edge. You're going to go into the work and into mid-air, into the work and into mid-air. Keep going with that, and when you've gone round all 4 sections, then you take the stitch width up a little bit more, so we make it a little bit wider still, and we take the stitch length down a little bit more, and that's going to really go in between and cover what you've just done. Now you will go all the way around and jump every time you do. I'm just cutting the threads here so that you can see exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go into the work and over, in and off. Run the machine really fast. You'll get a better stitch if you do that. So nice and fast. You're not going to go anywhere. You can take my hands off and just run that machine really well, because what we want is a jolly good close stitch all the way around it. And it's going to look something like this when you've done it. Can you see the satin stitch? It's an ideal chance now for you to use something like one of the rayon threads and get a nice shiny effect. So we want it really good and close, and you do it by building up the stitch as you go. So as you can see, I've completed satin stitching on all the 4 sections of the firm S133. And the box can be formed by folding up the sides, and it will be your choice as to whether you have this little pocket on the outside or whether you had it on the inside. It's also your choice as to whether this is the outside of the box or that is the outside of the box. It's completely reversible at this moment in time. Now you've probably got long dangly threads connecting the 2 sections of satin stitch. What I suggest you do is simply cut them in the middle and thread them into the satin stitch either end. Should you have missed any little bits, you can always take a felt tip pen that matches the thread and just colour over the edges to get rid of any little bits of white. So the box is now ready to be turned into the base of the box. Fold the sides up, and if I just put a pin in them, you will see. Now I'm going to have it the other way around. I prefer the pretty flowers on the outside. And just pin those flaps and the box then will appear. So fold it up like that. And as I said, it'd be your choice as to whether you have this pocket on the outside or the pocket on the inside. Now it is perfectly possible to stitch down here on the sewing machine, but it does require squashing the box somewhat. You might prefer just to put a couple of hand stitches very close to the firm interfacing, just to keep the sides of the box together. But you're never going to lose anything because there's no hole at all in the side of the box. And there's your last one. Right, so there is the box base, its lid. The lid is made in exactly the same way. Take your 4 sides to the lid, stick them on with the masking tape, iron some fabric to one side, that is the fusible side of the S133. When you've done that, you're going to trim the fabric right off back to the edges of the entire lid. And what I like to do on the corners is a very slight little round, because it's much easier to satin stitch round a curve than it is round a corner. So just nip the corners off very gently. Don't take off too much because it won't fit the base of the box otherwise. So trim off the excess fabric all the way around, just rounding the corners slightly. When you've done that, remove the masking tape and the Bondaweb and press another piece of fabric to the other side. So having fused another piece of fabric to the other side, I'm now trimming the second piece of fabric back to match the first, and remembering those little roundy corners. Once you've trimmed the fabric completely back, you're going to do exactly as we've already described, is sew close to the edge with a small stitch, really, really, really close to the edge, and then you're going to satin stitch round it. And remember, the satin stitch needs to be done in a variety of stages. So stage 1 is not too wide on the stitch width and round about 1 to 1.2 on the stitch length. You then make the stitch width a little bit wider and you close up the stitch length. So stitch width round about possibly 4.5 to 5. It does depend on what your machine does. But it's up on the stitch width and down on the stitch length. And remember, you're always going into the edge of the fabric and over in and off and in and off, and gradually build it up until you get a really nice solid line of satin stitch all the way around the entire thing. So I'm now just going to sew around the edge of my box lid and show you then how to complete the box. So as you can see, I've now satin stitched all the way round the lid. And I'm afraid now the next little bit has to be hand sewing. You're going to bring the sides of the lid together and just catch them with a small stitch, literally across the bottom of the satin stitching, so just across here. I did try to do it on the machine, but it just wasn't possible. So double thread will actually sew it easier, and just put a couple of stitches through the stitching itself just to hold the corners of the lid down. And it's going to look something like the lid I have here. So a couple of stitches towards the very bottom. Now something to consider, you could, if you wanted to, actually embroider the box and indeed the box lid before you actually do any more adjusting, i.e. turn it into a box. So there is just a basic box, but look how much better it could look if perhaps you did some stippling all over it or some fancy stitching. That's going to give it a very different finish from the plain one that I showed you. But you do need to do that before you turn it into a box, because it's well nigh on impossible afterwards. So once you finish the lid, bring the sides of the lid together and a couple of stitches just straight across there. Now if for some reason it doesn't fit the box terribly well afterwards because you cut this a little bit too small, putting a bead in between the two sides of the lid will actually just make that top of the lid a little bit larger. So hand sew the corners together. I've stitched the lid, just caught it on the corners there. I've also caught the top four corners of the box, and I can put the lid onto the box now and it fits a treat. What we haven't dealt with is the flaps, or are the flaps sticking out inside here, these little pockets. Now it's entirely and utterly up to you what you do. You could have the pockets on the outside, or because I've only caught it on the top there, I could actually tuck the pocket back inside. So you can do whatever your little heart desires with the pocket on the corner there. Sometimes, and I personally like this best, I will open the little pocket out, flatten it down, and then just catch it to the sides of the box with a very small stitch either side just to hold it in place. And it'll look a little bit like the one I have over here, where I've just caught it down on the corners of that little pocket section there. If you prefer, there's no reason why you can't turn the top edge down and roll it down for something subtly different. Or indeed, you can flatten it and then pull the top bit down and just arrange it exactly how you happen to fancy. So you do with the pockets whatever you wish. The lid will now fit a treat because it was just 1/4 inch a little bit larger. And if you want, there's no reason why you couldn't put some decoration on the lid, as I have done with this little box. I put a small felt flower on the top. There's no reason why you couldn't have perhaps a yo-yo, or sometimes known as a Suffolk puff. Now that you understand how to make the box, there's no reason why you can't use a hexagon and have a 6-sided box, exactly the same technique, and it is all explained in the book Sew Pieces. If you preferred, and you can draw a pentagon, you can have a 5-sided box, or indeed you could prepare an octagon where you would have an octagonal base and then the 8 sides. You do exactly the same trick, attach them with masking tape, trim everything back, there we are, trimmed back, put another piece of fabric on the top, press it, and then stitch with your satin stitch along the stiffened sections. The interesting thing about the boxes is that the more sides you have, the distance between the two pieces for the little pocket gets smaller and smaller. But there you are. That is how you make a fabric box, and whether you have a pentagon one, or whether you have an octagonal one, or whether you stick to the basic square one, the choice is yours. So all you need is a little bit of Bondaweb and some S133, some time, some fabric, and you've got a box. Enjoy.